Hi, my name's Daisha, and I'm going to talk about language development in toddlerhood and Noam Chomsky's theory of innate human language and his idea of the language acquisition device that exists exclusively in humans. The rapid acceleration of language development can be attributed to the increase in synaptic density found in a child's brain during toddlerhood. As you can see in this image from our textbook for the course in Chapter 5, from birth to age 2, synaptic density changes very drastically. At birth, there are very few synaptic connections, and at 2 years old, the synaptic connections are so dense that it's difficult to distinguish between different neurons, where one ends and where one begins. Synaptic density, being just the number of synaptic connections, increases really rapidly in the frontal cortex, and synapses are produced at about 2 million per second during toddlerhood. Around age 2, toddlers are going to have over 100 trillion synaptic connections, which is really unfathomable, but that is whenever your synapses really begin to multiply and increase really rapidly to the point where synaptic connections peak around 3 years old. In the beginning of toddlerhood, between 12 and 18 months of age, children will begin to use holophrases, which is using one word to represent many different ideas. So an example of this would be a child using the word cup to say that they want their cup because they're thirsty, or they see their cup, or maybe they dropped their cup. Two other milestones that are reached at this point of toddlerhood are overextension and underextension. Overextension is the use of a word to describe many other things. So that would be like using the word spoon to describe all utensils like forks, knives, and spatulas. Underextension would be using a general term to refer to one specific thing. So an example would be like a toddler calling a cat, a family pet cat, kitty, instead of calling the cat its actual name. Between 18 and 24 months is when the naming explosion is happening. This is also sometimes referred to as a vocabulary spurt. It's where the pace of learning new words doubles from 1 to 3 words per week to 5 to 6 words per week. Also during this time, like we saw earlier on that image of synaptic density from birth to age 2, this is a time in the toddler's life where their brain is forming many synaptic connections. Those connections are allowing the toddler to have an increased memory capability and an ability to infer word meaning. So they're able to understand what a word means and remember a word after hearing it only one time. This is referred to as fast mapping. Another key feature of this age is that they can use telegraphic speech. So those 2-word phrases that demonstrate syntactic awareness, which is word order, but they lack connecting word, such as and or the. Towards the end of toddlerhood, between 24 and 36 months of age, toddlers use prepositions such as under and through. They also understand more complex categories than they did before, such as understanding that a dog belongs to the animal category. There is a continuation of under and overextension and telegraphic speech. It's just a little bit more complex in that they use about 3 or 4 words instead of 2 words in telegraphic speech. There's also an over-regularization of grammar, and this is because they understand the grammatical rules by the end of age 3 without explicit instruction, and they apply them in context where it's not necessarily needed to be applied. For instance, the rule of adding an S to the end of a word to make it plural would be incorrect if a child said mouses instead of saying mice. The rapid advancement of language in toddlerhood seems to come so easy to toddlers that it's kind of difficult to understand how much of language is based on biology and how much of it is based on the environment around them. Many psychologists believed that language was a result of mimicry, which was demonstrated by a toddler's ability to form mental representations or thinking about the range of possibilities and selecting the action that created a desired outcome, and also to utilize deferred imitation, which is just repeating an action that was already observed at a different time. Noam Chomsky opposed this view in the late 50s by proposing the existence of a language acquisition device. He presented this as an innate biological feature of the brain that allows children to identify and understand the grammatical rules of the language in their surrounding environment. This idea is still really widely debated, and it's unclear how foundational biology is in language development as opposed to social stimulation. Humans have several distinct anatomical structures that allow for the production of language. The larynx is lower in the throat than in other primates. This creates a large pharynx, which is a sound chamber above the vocal cords, and allows humans to produce a wider range of sounds than other animals. Early hominids did not have the same anatomy, which leads researchers to believe that its location plays a major evolutionary role in the development of human language. The human tongue is small and can move freely, which controls the flow of air from the larynx and allows for different sounds to be produced as well. Also, human lips are much more flexible and can control the airflow to alter sounds. Certain genes have also recently been linked to language, which can be important to understanding the development of the human species. Evolutionary biologists believe that language evolved in humans as a means of survival. They link it to the evolutionary need to communicate with increasingly large groups of humans as a means of locating food or forming sexual partnerships. This means that natural selection would have been in favor of those humans with language abilities. Additionally, the brain's anatomy is set up for language learning. Both Broca's and Wernicke's areas are for language production. Broca's area is in the left frontal lobe and is to produce language, and Wernicke's area is in the left temporal lobe and is primarily used for the comprehension of language. Some linguists believe that language contributed to the functioning of the large brain found in humans. Though humans have the biological system in place to communicate using a language, the ability to communicate with the language system is not exclusive to humans. Natural language, however, is significantly more complex than artificial language and language produced by other animals, as demonstrated by Berwick et al. This means that humans must have the proper biological machinery to process complex language. Sequence C illustrates the syntactic complexity found exclusively in human language, as opposed to sequence A is a representation of the mimicry involved in apes learning sign language, and sequence B, which illustrates how bird number 1 would respond to bird number 2 based on the original input received by bird number 2. This type of language production is referred to as audiovisual. Berwick et al. Explains that human language is distinct and innate as indicated by our additional dorsal connection between Broca's area 44 and the posterior superior temporal cortex, connecting auditory sensory areas in the superior temporal cortex to the premotor cortex, without which syntactic complexity would be impossible for the human brain to process. The book approaches syntactic complexity in human language by describing the concept of infinite generativity, which is the ability to combine word symbols of a language in an infinite number of diverse ways. Humans are unique in this ability to the case of innate language faculty. The additional dorsal connection found in humans is the splenium of the corpus callosum, and it may support language development through its connections to the dorsal and ventral visual attention networks, according to Swanson et al. This research reported that previous studies in infants and adults saw associations between the splenium and visual orienting. Visual orienting is a behavior that's foundational to rapid and efficient processing of really important information in the environment. This supports language acquisition. The majority of splenium projections end in the visual areas of the occipital lobe of the brain, so it's likely that visual orienting supports early language production. This study found that the splenium is very significant in language learning through infancy and toddlerhood, and it's connected to the primary visual cortices, and visual orienting is so important for acquiring a spoken language. This study also found that children with more growth of the splenium during the time between 6 months and 24 months had a higher language production ability, so it can be said that this part of the brain is very integral in learning language, and it's also only found in the human brain. Though it isn't really clear how much of language is a result of our biology and how much of language is a result of the social stimulation we receive in toddlerhood, it's still really fascinating to investigate deeper into these ideas, especially as research is expanding and technology is getting better and more equipped to look deeper into our genetic makeup and get better images of what's going on neuronally as we're producing language and learning language. Thank you.